This is our next lecture on section 2.3. We're talking about absolute values this time, and I have one statement to say about about opposites and the additive inverse. So I put the answers up to example 3 here, which you'll find in the notes, but the one that I really wanted to talk about was the opposite or the additive inverse of 0. And I just wanted to really hit home on that the fact that 0 has no opposite, no additive inverse, and so when we want the opposite of this, we're still saying it's 0 because 0 is neither positive nor negative. Now let's get going on the absolute value. The absolute value tells us about how far away something is from 0, but it doesn't care about the direction. So when I say the absolute value, I want a number without its sign, and that's how a lot of people just think about that. And notationally, we're going to use these funky set of parentheses that are just a straight line. Just remember, they are parentheses, so when we see them in order of operations, we treat them like parentheses, and then we evaluate what they mean. So the absolute value, if a is some real number, we say the absolute value of a positive a is just a. Or if we have a negative a, the absolute value of a negative a is an a. It's a units away from 0, number without its sign. So here we'll look at our first example, the absolute value of negative 230. So the absolute value of negative 230, this is asking how far away from 0 is it? Well, it's 230 units away from 0. I don't care what side of 0 it is, I just want to know how many units away from 0, so 230. The absolute value of 0, well, 0 is 0 units away from 0, so it's still 0. And then the absolute value of 85, the absolute value of 85 is 85 because it is 85 units away from 0, regardless of which direction I went. And finally, the absolute value of a negative 1/2. The absolute value of a negative 1/2 is simply 1/2, the number without its sign, because I don't care about the direction I went. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do is a little bit more complicated here. We're going to combine the idea of an absolute and an opposite, and this is where we get a little tricky sometimes. So what we want to remember is we're going to evaluate inside the parentheses, and then we'll evaluate the parentheses, and then finally we'll go ahead and we'll look at opposite if there is one of those outside the parentheses. So the first one here, we say the opposite of the absolute value of a negative 5. And it's really important that you understand how I read that. So now the first thing that I'm going to do in order to do this problem is I'm going to evaluate this. What's the absolute value of a negative 5? Well, that, of course, is a 5. And then that's going to say what's the opposite of a 5. And so my final answer here is going to be a negative 5. And that is the opposite of the absolute value of a negative 5. Now let's go on to the second one. We're probably going to get cut off right about in the middle of this example 5, so I'll continue it in the next lecture. So this one says the absolute value of a negative, or the opposite of a negative 3/5. Let me say that again. This says the absolute value of the opposite of a negative 3/5. So this time we're going to look at on the inside of this. So we're looking at this statement right here. The opposite of a negative 3/5 is a 3/5, or a positive 3/5. And then we still have to evaluate the absolute value of that. And the absolute value of this is, of course, a 3/5, the number without its sign. And so it doesn't look any different, but it's very important that you write these steps out because that is important in actually doing these problems and seeing the logical process in that. And I can't see in your head, so I need to see it on paper. Now I'm just going to go ahead and end here, and then in our next lecture I'll do the last two, and then we'll continue on from there.